Chapter 1. The Perfect Day. Tada. Late afternoon sun cast golden rays through the towering oak trees of Riverside Gardens, one of Connecticut's most prestigious wedding venues. White silk ribbons fluttered gently in the September breeze, and the sound of violin music drifted across the manicured lawns, where 200 guests had gathered to celebrate Jake Morrison's wedding to his college sweetheart, Emma. I stood at the edge of the reception area, smoothing down my navy blue dress, the one I'd saved 3 months to buy because I wanted to look perfect for my cousin's special day. The fabric felt expensive against my skin, a rare luxury. In my otherwise budget-conscious life as a graduate student, my reflection in the nearby fountain showed a young woman with dark hair swept into an elegant updo, trying her best to blend in with a crowd that seemed to effortlessly embody old money and privilege. Maya, there you are. Jake's voice boomed across the patio as he approached, his tuxedo impeccable and his smile radiant. At 26, my cousin had always been the golden boy of the Morrison family, Harvard MBA, successful investment banker, and now marrying the daughter of a federal judge. I was looking everywhere for you. Emma's been dying to meet you properly. I felt a genuine smile spread across my face as he pulled me into a warm hug. Jake had always been kind to me, even when we were kids, and the rest of the family seemed to view me as an obligation rather than a blessing. Congratulations, Jake. The ceremony was beautiful. Emma looked absolutely stunning. She didn't she? His eyes sparkled with the kind of happiness that made my heart both swell with joy for him and ache with longing for something I'd never quite experienced myself. Come on, let me introduce you to some people. Uncle Robert was asking about you earlier. He wants to hear about your master's program. As we walked through the reception, I couldn't help but notice the seamless way Jake moved through his world. Handshakes with business associates, warm embraces with college friends, inside jokes with relatives I barely knew despite sharing their last name for the past 16 years. This was his tribe, his natural habitat, and he belonged here in a way that I envied with every fiber of my being. Jake, darling. Aunt Sarah's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a knife through silk. She appeared beside us in a stunning emerald green gown that probably cost more than my semester's tuition. Her silver hair styled in an elegant chignon that had likely required hours at an expensive salon. At 58, Sarah Morrison was still a beautiful woman, but her beauty had always carried a coldness that made me feel like I was constantly being evaluated and found wanting. Mom, you remember Maya, right? Jake said, his arm still around my shoulders in a gesture that I treasured more than he could know. Sarah's smile was perfect, the kind practiced by wives of successful businessmen at countless charity, galas, and country club events. But her gray eyes, so similar to my own, remained calculating as they swept over me from head to toe. Of course, how could I forget? There was something in her tone that made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Maya's finishing her master's in social work at UConn, Jake continued proudly. She's specializing in family therapy. Isn't that amazing how, Noble? Sarah replied, and I felt the familiar sting of her subtle disapproval. It was the same tone she'd used when I'd chosen state school over the private colleges she'd suggested, the same inflection when I'd declined to pledge the sorority she'd belonged to, the same barely concealed disappointment that had colored our interactions for as long as I could remember. I should go check on the wedding party, Jake said, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. You two catch up. Maya, save me a dance later, okay? And just like that, I was alone with the woman who had raised me, but never quite let me forget that I was there by circumstance rather than choice. You look nice, Sarah said, and for a moment, I thought perhaps this conversation might be different. Though I do hope you didn't overspend on that dress. I know your finances are, limited. The comment hit exactly where she intended. It was on sale, I replied quietly, hating how defensive I sounded. Sarah's perfectly manicured fingers adjusted the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. An anniversary gift from Uncle Robert that cost more than I made in 6 months at my part-time campus job. I see you still haven't learned to manage money properly. Your mother was the same way, you know, always living beyond her means. The mention of my mother, Sarah's younger sister, who had died in a car accident when I was 8, sent a familiar stab of pain through my chest. Sarah rarely spoke about my parents, and when she did, it was usually to point out their perceived failings. I'm managing fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The dress was an investment. I wanted to look appropriate for Jake's wedding. Appropriate. Sarah repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. Yes, I suppose that's important when one is in your position. Before I could ask what she meant by that cryptic comment, Emma appeared at my side like a vision in ivory silk and delicate lace. Her wedding dress was clearly custom-made, probably costing more than most people's cars, but she wore it with such natural grace that it looked effortless. Maya, I'm so glad I finally caught you, Emma said, her smile genuine and warm. Jake talks about you all the time. He says you're the smartest person in the family. I felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment, even as I noticed Sarah's slight frown. That's very kind of him to say. Congratulations on your marriage, Emma. You make a beautiful bride. Thank you. And thank you for the lovely card. Your note about family being chosen rather than given really touched me. Emma's eyes sparkled with sincerity. I hope we can get to know each other better. I've always wanted a sister. The word sister hung in the air, and I saw something flicker across Sarah's face, an expression I couldn't quite read but that made my chest tighten with inexplicable dread. How sweet, Sarah said, her voice carrying that particular tone of false warmth that I'd learned to recognize over the years. Though I'm not sure Maya really counts as Sarah. Uncle Robert's voice interrupted as he approached our little group, looking distinguished in his tailored tuxedo. He kissed his wife's cheek before turning to me with a warm smile. Maya, sweetheart, you look lovely. How's school going? Very well, thank you, Uncle Robert. I should be graduating next spring. That's wonderful. You know, my firm has connections with several nonprofits in the area. We should talk about internship opportunities. The genuine kindness in his voice was such a stark contrast to his wife's subtle hostility that it made my throat tight with emotion. Robert had always been good to me, though he traveled so much for work that our interactions were limited. That's very generous of you. I managed to say nonsense. Family takes care of family, right? Robert squeezed my shoulder affectionately, and I saw Sarah's jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. Speaking of family, Emma said, I was hoping to get a photo with all of Jake's cousins. Maya, would you mind? The photographer said the lighting by the fountain is perfect right now. Of course, I replied, grateful for an excuse to escape the strange tension that seemed to be building around Sarah. As we walked toward the fountain where Jake and his other cousins were gathering, I heard Sarah's voice behind us, pitched just low enough that she probably thought I couldn't hear. Robert, we need to talk about this situation. It's getting out of hand. Not now, Sarah, Uncle Robert replied, his voice carrying a warning tone I'd never heard him use with his wife before. I pretended not to have heard the exchange, but something cold settled in my stomach as I posed for photos with Jake's arm around me, surrounded by cousins who had shared childhood holidays and family vacations that I could only experience through their stories and photographs. The photographer snapped away, capturing what looked like a happy family moment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to shift. In the golden hour light of that perfect September evening, surrounded by people who shared my last name but not necessarily my sense of belonging, I had no idea that within the next few hours, the carefully constructed foundation of my identity would crumble completely. Chapter 2, The Truth. Behind the masks, the reception moved indoors as the sun set, and the grand ballroom of Riverside Gardens transformed into a wonderland of twinkling lights and elegant sophistication. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the cream-colored walls, while round tables draped in ivory linens created intimate conversation spaces throughout the room. I found myself seated at table 12, strategically positioned between Jake's college friends and some distant relatives I'd met only once or twice at previous family gatherings. The dinner conversation flowed easily enough. Discussions about careers, travel plans, and shared memories of Jake from his college days. I contributed when I could, but mostly I found myself observing the easy camaraderie of people who had grown up with money, who took for granted the kind of security and privilege that I'd spent my entire adult life working toward. Maya, right? The woman beside me, introduced earlier as Jessica, one of Emma's bridesmaids, turned to me with polite interest. Jake mentioned you're studying social work. That must be really rewarding. It is, I replied, grateful for the genuine curiosity in her voice. I want to work with families in crisis, help children who are going through difficult transitions. That's so important, said David, one of Jake's fraternity brothers from Harvard. My sister does family law, and she's always talking about how crucial good social workers are in the system. The conversation continued pleasantly, and for a while, I began to relax into the evening. These people were kind, and they seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Maybe I'd been overthinking Sarah's earlier comments. Maybe I was just being overly sensitive, as I'd been accused of being throughout my childhood whenever I'd questioned my place in the Morrison family hierarchy. The speeches began after the main course, and I watched with a mix of affection and longing as various family members and friends stood to toast the happy couple. Uncle Robert's speech was particularly touching. He spoke about watching Jake grow from a determined little boy into a successful young man, about the importance of family legacy and carrying forward the Morrison name with honor and integrity. The Morrison family has always believed in taking care of our own, Robert said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. We stick together through thick and thin. We support each other's dreams, and we never forget where we come from, or who we belong to. The words should have felt inclusive, should have wrapped around me like a warm embrace. Instead, they left me feeling strangely hollow, as if there was some subtext I wasn't quite grasping. Sarah rose next, elegant and poised as always, her emerald gown catching the light as she lifted her champagne glass. To Jake and Emma, she began, her voice clear and confident. Marriage is about many things. Love, certainly, but also about heritage, about family legacy, about understanding your place in the world, and the responsibilities that come with it. Her eyes found mine, across the room, and something in her gaze made my blood run cold. It's about knowing who you really are and where you truly belong, she continued, still looking directly at me. Some people are born to privilege and responsibility. Others, ... She paused, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Others simply find themselves in fortunate circumstances through no merit of their own. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and I saw several people glance in my direction with confused expressions. Jake looked puzzled, his brow furrowed as he tried to understand his mother's unusual choice of words for a wedding toast. But tonight, Sarah concluded, raising her glass higher, we celebrate those who truly belong to this family, who carry our blood and our legacy forward into the future. To Jake and Emma, may you build a family as strong and legitimate as the one that raised you. The word legitimate hit me like a physical blow. The scattered applause that followed felt forced and uncomfortable, and I noticed several people whispering to each other with concerned expressions. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing fresh air, and made my way toward the terrace doors on unsteady legs. The cool September air was a relief against my flushed cheeks, but it did nothing to calm the chaos of emotions swirling in my chest. Maya, wait. Jake's voice called from behind me, and I turned to see him striding across the terrace. His bow tie slightly askew, and his hair mussed from dancing. What the hell was that about? Mom's speech was completely out of line. Was it, though? I heard myself ask, the words coming out more bitter than I'd intended. Maybe she was just being honest for once. Honest about what? Maya, you're my cousin. Your family? You've been part of this family since you were 8 years old. The pain in his voice was genuine, and it made my chest tighten with guilt. Jake had always been good to me, had always treated me like his equal, his friend, his family. None of this was his fault. Have I, though? I turned to face him fully, and in the soft light from the ballroom windows, I could see the confusion and hurt written across his features. Really, Jake? Because I've spent the last 16 years feeling like I was auditioning for a role I was never quite right for. That's not true, isn't it? The words came tumbling out now. 16 years of repressed feelings and carefully swallowed hurts spilling into the space between us. I'm the one who went to state school instead of the Ivy League. I'm the one who works 3 jobs to pay for grad school while everyone else gets trust funds and family connections. I'm the one who gets seated at table 12 instead of at the family table. Jake's face fell as the truth of my words sank in. Maya, I had no idea you felt. Of course you didn't, I said gently, because I couldn't bear to see him blame himself for something that wasn't his fault. Why would you? This is your world, Jake. You belong here. You've never had to question your place or wonder if people really want you around. But you do belong here, he insisted, stepping closer. Aunt Carol was my dad's sister. That makes you my cousin. That makes you family, does it? The question hung between us like a challenge. Or does it just make me the obligation your parents took on when they had to? Before Jake could respond, the terrace door opened and Sarah emerged, her expression unreadable in the shadows. She'd removed her jewelry, and her perfectly styled hair showed signs of the evening's festivities. But her posture remained rigid with the kind of control she'd maintained throughout my childhood. Maya, she said, her voice neutral, I think it's time we had a conversation. I think we've had enough conversation for one evening, I replied, not trusting myself to remain civil. No, Sarah said firmly, we haven't. Not nearly enough. She moved to stand beside her son, and in the family resemblance between them, I felt my own otherness more acutely than ever. Jake, go back inside. Your wife is looking for you. Mom, if this is about your speech, go Jake. There was steel in Sarah's voice now, the same tone she'd used throughout my childhood when she'd wanted to have one of our private conversations about my behavior, my grades, my choices. Jake looked between his mother and me, clearly torn. Maya, we'll talk later, okay, Aunt? Don't let whatever this is change anything between us. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and watched him disappear back into the warmth and light of the ballroom. Then it was just Sarah and me on the terrace, with 16 years of unspoken tensions finally demanding to be acknowledged. You want to know the truth? Sarah asked, her voice carrying a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. Fine, let's talk. About the truth? She moved to the stone railing that overlooked the gardens below, her hands gripping the cold marble as if anchoring herself for what was to come. Your mother came to us 3 months before you were born, Maya. 3 months. Not after the accident, not when you were 8 years old. She came to us pregnant and desperate, begging us to help her. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What are you talking about? Carol wasn't married to your father when she got pregnant? Hell, she barely knew him. He was some musician she met at a bar, and when she told him about the baby, he disappeared. She was 22, broke, and terrified. Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were recounting someone else's story rather than dismantling the foundation of my identity. That's impossible, I whispered. My parents were married. I have their wedding photo in my room. Sarah turned to face me, and in the moonlight, her expression was almost pitying. A staged photo, Maya? We paid for it, along with the fake marriage certificate and the made-up story about your father dying in a car accident when you were a baby. We thought it would be easier for everyone if you believed you came from a normal family. The terrace seemed to be spinning around me. You're lying. Your real father's name was Marcus Johnson. He was a guitarist in some nobody band that played dive bars around Hartford. Carol was infatuated with him for about 3 months before she realized he was never going to be anything more than a dreamer with a guitar and a drinking problem. Each word was a hammer blow, shattering everything I thought I knew about myself, my history, my place in the world. When she came to us, Carol was living in a studio apartment that barely had heat, working to minimum wage jobs, and scared out of her mind about raising a child alone. Robert and I, we were trying to have children of our own, but it wasn't happening, so we made a deal. A deal. The words felt foreign in my mouth. We would support her through the pregnancy, and for the first few years of your life. Give her money for a decent apartment, help with childcare, make sure she could finish her nursing degree. In exchange, Sarah's voice trailed off. In exchange for what? In exchange, when the time was right, when you were old enough to understand, she would tell you the truth about your father and let us adopt you properly. Give you the Morrison name, the opportunities that come with it, the security of a real family. But she never told me, I said numbly. No, she never did. Carol got comfortable with our arrangement. She liked having the safety net of our money and support without having to give up control of your life. Years went by and she kept making excuses, kept saying she'd tell you when you were older, when you were more mature, when the time was right. Sarah's voice hardened. But the time was never right, was it? Because the truth was that she'd figured out how to have the best of both worlds, our financial support and her independence. So you, what? Killed her? The accusation came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was beyond caring about politeness. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. Don't be ridiculous. The car accident was exactly that, an accident. Carol was driving back from a night shift at the hospital when a drunk driver ran a red light, but her death left us in an impossible situation. Impossible how? We had a scared 8-year-old girl who had just lost the only parent she'd ever known, and no legal claim to her whatsoever. Carol had never put Robert's name on your birth certificate, never started adoption proceedings, never even told you that we weren't just your aunt and uncle. The pieces were starting to fall into place, creating a picture that made me feel sick to my stomach. So you took me in, but you never actually adopted me. We tried, Sarah said, and for the first time, her voice carried a note of what might have been regret. But without Carol's consent, and with your biological father's whereabouts unknown, the legal process was complicated. It would have taken years. And in the meantime, you were grieving and traumatized. We thought it was better to just let you believe you belonged with us naturally, but I don't. Do I? The question came out as barely a whisper. I'm not really family. I'm just what? A charity case you've been stuck with for 16 years. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the darkened gardens. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. You want to know why tonight's speech upset you so much, Maya? It's because somewhere deep down, you've always known, you've always felt it, that you don't quite fit, that you don't quite belong. That's not cruelty talking, that's truth. And what about Jake does he know? Jake knows that you're his cousin, that your mother was my sister, that you came to live with us after her death. He doesn't know the details, and neither does Robert. They both believe the story we created. The lie, you mean. The protection, Sarah corrected firmly, from a truth that would have served no purpose except to hurt people. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of her. So what happens now? Now that I know the truth? Sarah turned back to face me, and in her expression, I saw something that might have been relief mixed with resolve. Now you get to decide what kind of person you want to be, Maya. You can keep living the lie. Keep pretending you belong somewhere you don't. Keep taking advantage of a generosity that was never meant to be permanent, or you can finally grow up and make your own way in the world. Stop depending on money and opportunities that were never really yours to begin with. The cruelty of it took my breath away. After 16 years of subtle slights and careful exclusions, after years of making me feel like I was never quite good enough to deserve the life I'd been given, she was now telling me that life had never been mine at all. You know what? I said, my voice growing stronger as anger began to replace shock. You're right about one thing. I have always felt like I didn't quite belong, but I thought that was my fault, that I wasn't trying hard enough or wasn't grateful enough. I never realized it was because you've spent 16 years making sure I felt that way. Maya, no, let me finish. I stepped closer to her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel intimidated by Sarah Morrison's disapproval. You could have told me the truth years ago. You could have been honest about my parents, about my situation, about what this arrangement really was. Instead, you chose to let me believe I was your family, while simultaneously making sure I never felt worthy of being your family. We gave you opportunities. You gave me obligations. I corrected. Obligations to be grateful, to not ask for too much, to not expect the same treatment as Jake, to always remember that I was here by your grace rather than by right. Sarah's mask of control was beginning to crack, and I could see anger flashing in her eyes. We gave you a roof over your head, food on your table, a good education, Things you would have given to any child you took in, I finished. Basic human decency isn't a gift, Sarah. It's the minimum requirement for calling yourself a guardian. Your mother left you with nothing, Sarah said, her voice rising for the first time. No money, no inheritance, no college fund, no family, except us. We could have let the state take you. We could have walked away. Maybe you should have, I said quietly, and the words hung between us like a challenge. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the wedding reception drifted through the ballroom windows. Laughter, music, the celebration of a love that was legitimate and recognized and celebrated by everyone who mattered. So what happens now? I asked again. Sarah straightened her shoulders, her mask of composure sliding back into place. Now you finish your degree on your own dime. You find your own place to live. You stop using the Morrison name for opportunities and connections. You become exactly what you've always been, Maya, someone who doesn't really belong to this family. The words should have devastated me. 6 months ago, they would have. But standing there on that terrace, with the truth finally laid bare, between us, I felt something unexpected. Relief. You know what, Sarah? I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. For the first time in 16 years, we finally agree on something. Chapter 3. Breaking point and breakthrough. Didn't go back into the reception. Instead, I walked around to the front of the venue, my heels clicking against the paved walkway as I made my way toward the valet stand. The September night air was crisp against my bare arms, but I barely felt the cold. Everything inside me felt numb, as if Sarah's revelations had short-circuited my ability to process emotion. Excuse me, miss, did you need your car? The young valet looked concerned as I approached, probably wondering why a wedding guest was leaving so early and looking so shell-shocked. No car, I managed to say. Could you call me a taxi? Of course. There's a bench right over there if you'd like to wait. I sat on the wooden bench beside the circular driveway, watching expensive cars come and go as other guests departed. Most were older relatives who had fulfilled their social obligations and were ready to head home to their comfortable lives. I wondered how many of them knew the truth about my situation. How many had been watching me all these years with the knowledge that I was living a carefully constructed lie. Another long pause. Then, oh my God, Maya, if this is true, it is true. I can send you the newspaper article about Marcus Johnson. I can show you the search results that confirm everything your mother told me. But why? Jake's voice cracked with emotion. Why would they lie about something like this? Why would they let you believe God, Maya? You must feel so betrayed. I do, I admitted, but I also feel relieved, in a weird way. Finally understanding why I never felt like I belonged. Why? Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. It wasn't because I was failing to live up to some standard. It was because the standard was designed to be impossible for me to meet. Maya, listen to me. Jake's voice became urgent, determined. This doesn't change anything between us, okay? You're still my cousin. You're still family. I don't care about blood or legal documents or any of that bullshit. You're family, because, I say, you're family. The loyalty in his voice made my chest tight with emotion, but I couldn't let myself be swayed by it. Not anymore. That's sweet of you to say, Jake, but it's not that simple. Your mother made it very clear last night that my welcome in the Morrison family has expired. She wants me to stop using the family name, stop accepting family money, stop pretending I belong somewhere I don't. She had no right to say that. Mom doesn't speak for all of us, doesn't she? Though, I asked quietly, Jake, be honest with me. In your family, when your mother makes a decision about something, how often do people really oppose her? The silence that followed was answer enough. I need to go, I said finally. I have a lot to figure out, and I can't do it while I'm still emotionally tied to a family that was never really mine to begin with. Maya, please don't do anything drastic. Let me talk to Mom, let me talk to Dad. We can work this out. Some things can't be worked out, Jake. Some things can only be accepted, and moved forward from. After I hung up, I sat in the morning sunlight streaming through my kitchen window and made a list of everything I needed to do. It was surprisingly short. Find a new place to live that I could afford on my student income. Apply for additional financial aid to replace the family support I'd be losing. Change my name back to Johnson. And figure out how to rebuild an identity that had never really been mine in the first place. But first, I had one more search to complete. Chapter 4. Finding my own way forward. 3 months later, I stood outside a small ranch house in a work neighborhood of Manchester, Connecticut, holding a manila envelope that contained copies of everything I had found about Marcus Johnson. The November air was sharp and cold, and my breath formed small clouds as I tried to work up the courage to knock on the door it had taken me weeks to track down. Jennifer Johnson, now Jennifer Martinez, after remarrying, and her daughter, Amanda, through a combination of social media, searching, public records, and one helpful librarian at the Hartford Public Library, I'd finally located them living about an hour from my college campus. I'd written 3 different letters, trying to explain who I was and why I wanted to meet them. But ultimately, I'd decided that some conversations needed to happen face. The worst thing that could happen was that they'd slam the door in my face. And after everything I'd been through, that didn't seem so terrible. I knocked 3 times and waited. The woman who answered the door was in her early 40s, with graying, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and paint stains on her sweatshirt. She looked tired but kind, with the sort of weathered prettiness that spoke of a life lived without pretense. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious, but not unfriendly. "Mrs. Martinez. My name is Maya Johnson, I think. I think Marcus Johnson might have been my father." The change in her expression was immediate and dramatic. She gripped the doorframe for support, her face going pale as she studied my features with new intensity. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You have his eyes. And his hands. Look at your hands." I looked down at my hands, long-fingered and graceful, and for the first time in my life, I saw something of myself reflected in another person's recognition. Can we talk?" I asked hesitantly. Of course. Come in, Amanda," she called toward the back of the house. "Come here, honey, there's someone I want you to meet." The living room was small and comfortable, filled with family photos and artwork that had clearly been created by Amanda over the years. Jennifer gestured for me to sit on the couch while she settled into a worn armchair across from me. "I wondered if this day would come," she said softly. "Marcus told me about you, about your mother. He was so young when it happened, and so scared. He knew about me." The question came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. "He knew, Carol. That was your mother's name, right? She contacted him when she found out she was pregnant. But Marcus was barely 22, working odd jobs and trying to make it as a musician. He had nothing to offer except his name on a birth certificate, and Carol ... She said she didn't want that. She said she'd rather handle it on her own." A teenager appeared in the doorway, tall and lanky with dark hair and familiar gray eyes. This was Amanda, my half-sister, who'd grown up knowing the father I'd never met. "Amanda, this is Maya," Jennifer said gently. "She's your half-sister." Amanda's eyes widened, but she didn't look shocked. Curious, maybe, and a little wary, but not surprised. "You knew about me?" I asked. "Dad told me before he died," Amanda said, moving to sit beside her mother. "He said he had another daughter somewhere, and that he'd always regretted not being able to know you." "He regretted it." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, tinged with years of abandonment and anger. Jennifer leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Maya, I know how this must look to you, but Marcus tried to contact your mother several times over the years. He sent letters, tried calling, even drove to her apartment once when you were about 5, but she never responded. Her family, your family, made it very clear that his contact wasn't welcome. My family, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Your aunt and uncle, the Morrisons? Marcus received a letter from their lawyer when you were 6, telling him that any further attempts to contact you or your mother would result in legal action. They said that you were happy and well cared for, and that his interference would only disrupt your stability. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Sarah hadn't just hidden the truth from me, she'd actively prevented Marcus from being part of my life. He kept track of you, though, Amanda said quietly, through mutual friends of your mom's, through people who knew people. He knew when you started high school, when you graduated, when you got into college. He was proud of you, proud of me. I felt tears threatening again. He didn't even know me. He knew you were smart, Jennifer said. He knew you were kind, because Carol's friends said you were always helping other kids, always standing up for people who were being picked on. He knew you played piano, and that made him happy because he'd always hoped you might be musical like him. I thought about the old upright piano in the Morrison house, how I'd taught myself to play using library books and YouTube videos, how Sarah had always complained about the noise but never forbidden it outright. Why didn't he try harder? I asked. If he really wanted to know me, why did he let them scare him off? Jennifer and Amanda exchanged a look, and I saw pain flicker across both their faces. Because he was afraid, Jennifer said simply. Marcus grew up in foster care, Maya. He never had a stable family, never had people who could afford lawyers and private schools, and all the advantages the Morrisons could give you. He was convinced that you were better off without him. Besides, Amanda added, the lawyer's letter said that if he tried to contact you, they'd make sure he lost his parental rights completely, and that he'd never be able to see you, even when you turned 18. He was afraid that if he pushed too hard, they'd disappear with you entirely. I sat in silence, processing this new version of events. The father I'd imagined as a selfish man who'd abandoned his responsibilities had actually been a young, scared person who'd been systematically excluded from my life by people who'd had the money and power to enforce their will. What was he like? I asked finally. Amanda's face lit up. He was funny, really funny, and kind of goofy. He used to make up songs about everything, songs about doing the dishes, songs about Amanda's homework, songs about the weather. He couldn't carry a tune to save his life, but he loved music more than anything. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Where did you go? Mom said you weren't feeling well. Can we talk tomorrow? I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you and Emma are very happy together. It wasn't an answer to his question, but it was all I could manage right now. How do you tell someone you love that everything they believe about your shared family history is a fabrication? How do you explain that you've just discovered your entire identity was built on a foundation of lies and legal complications? The taxi arrived 20 minutes later, and I gave the driver my address, a small studio apartment near the Yukon campus that I'd been sharing with a roommate for the past 2 years. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for with my own work-study income and student loans. For the first time, I felt grateful for its modest independence. During the 40-minute drive back to my apartment, I tried to process everything Sarah had told me. My mother, Carol, hadn't been the happily married nurse I'd always imagined. She'd been a scared young woman who'd gotten pregnant by a musician she barely knew. The father I'd mourned my entire life, the father I'd imagined as a loving husband, who'd died tragically young, had never existed at all. Marcus Johnson, that was apparently my real father's name, a guitarist in a dive bar band with a drinking problem and a tendency to disappear when things got complicated. I tried to picture him, tried to imagine what he might look like. But all I could conjure was a generic image of a man with a guitar and hollow eyes. Here we are, the taxi driver said, pulling up in front of my building. I paid the fare and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. My roommate Jessica was at her boyfriend's place for the weekend, so the apartment was dark and quiet. I flipped on the lights and stood in the middle of the small living space, looking around at the mismatched furniture and secondhand decorations that had made this place feel like home. On my desk sat a framed photo of my mother and me, taken just a few months before her death. I was 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing a Halloween costume that my mother had spent weeks making by hand. She looked tired in the photo, but happy, with her arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders. I picked up the frame and studied my mother's face, searching for signs of the desperation and fear that Sarah had described. Had she really been as scared and struggling as Sarah claimed? Or was that just another manipulation, another way to make me feel like a burden that my mother couldn't handle alone? My laptop was open on the kitchen table, and almost without thinking, I found myself pulling it toward me and opening a web browser. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed, Marcus Johnson, guitarist, Hartford, Connecticut. The search results were sparse and mostly unrelated to what I was looking for. A few LinkedIn profiles for men with the same name but clearly different backgrounds, some social media accounts that didn't match the time frame, and a handful of news articles about various unrelated Marcus Johnsons. I tried refining the search. Marcus Johnson, musician, 1990s Hartford, still nothing useful. Then I tried searching for local music venues from that era, thinking maybe I could find old concert listings or band information. After an hour of searching, I finally found something promising. An archived article from a Hartford Alt Wheatley paper from 1999 that mentioned a band called Midnight Confession playing at a club called The Underground. The article included a grainy black and white photo of the band, and one of the musicians was identified as Marcus Johnson, guitar. I stared at the photo, trying to make out details in the poor quality image. The man identified as Marcus Johnson was tall and thin, with dark hair that fell across his forehead. Even in the blurry photograph, there was something familiar about the shape of his face. The set of his shoulders. My hands were shaking as I screenshot the image and saved it to my desktop. Then I continued searching, following every thread I could find about the underground, about local bands from that era, about anything that might tell me more about the man who was supposedly my biological father. It was nearly 3 in the morning when I finally found what I was looking for, an article from the Hartford Courant Archives about a local musician who had died in a car accident in 2003. The headline read, "Local musician killed in highway collision. Marcus Johnson, 34, of Hartford, was killed instantly when his vehicle was struck by a drunk driver on I-84 early Sunday morning. Johnson was returning from a performance at a Waterbury nightclub when the accident occurred. He is survived by his wife, Jennifer, and daughter, Amanda, age 7. I read the article 3 times before the implications fully sank in. If this was the same Marcus Johnson, and the age and location seemed to match, then my biological father had died when I was 15 years old. Not only had he been alive for most of my childhood, but he'd had another family, a wife and daughter, he'd chosen to stay with and care for. The knowledge hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been growing up believing my father had died tragically before I could know him, he'd actually been living 2 hours away, raising another daughter, building a life that didn't include me. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. Everything I'd believed about myself, about my family, about my place in the world, had been stripped away in the span of a few hours. I wasn't Carol Morrison's daughter raised by loving relatives. I wasn't part of the Morrison family legacy. I was Maya Johnson, the abandoned daughter of a musician who'd chosen to be a father to one child but not to me. The tears finally came then. 16 years of confusion and insecurity and carefully swallowed hurt pouring out in great, gasping sobs that echoed through the empty apartment. I cried for the father I'd never known, for the mother who'd struggled alone, for the little girl who'd spent her whole life trying to earn love that was always conditional, always contingent on being grateful enough, good enough, unobtrusive, enough. But somewhere in the midst of that grief, something else began to emerge. Anger. Clean, hot, clarifying anger at the waste of it all. At Sarah's calculated cruelty, at a system that had prioritized appearances over honesty, at the years I'd spent apologizing for taking up space in a family that had never really wanted me. I was done apologizing. I was done being grateful for the bare minimum. I was done pretending that conditional acceptance was the same thing as love. My phone rang at 7 in the morning, jarring me awake from where I'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. Maya, thank God I've been worried sick. You just disappeared last night, and Mom said you weren't feeling well, but something felt off about the whole thing. Jake's voice was hoarse with exhaustion, and I could hear wedding reception cleanup happening in the background, the clink of glassware being collected, the scrape of chairs being stacked. I'm fine, I said, my voice rough from crying. No, you're not. I could see it in your face last night before you left. Something's wrong, and I want to help. The genuine concern in his voice almost broke my resolve. Jake had always been kind to me, had always treated me like family in ways that his mother never had, but now I knew that even his kindness was based on a lie. Jake, I said carefully, what do you know about my parents? About how I came to live with your family? There was a pause on the other end of the line. What do you mean? You know the story on Carol was Dad's sister. She and your dad died in that car accident when you were 8, and you came to live with us. Maya, why are you asking about this? Because your mother told me the truth last night, Jake, the real truth. I heard him set something down heavily, probably a box of wedding decorations. What truth? The truth about my father never existing, about my mother coming to your parents, pregnant and desperate, about the 16 years of lies that everyone's been living except me. The silence on the other end stretched so long that I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you talking about? So I told him everything Sarah had revealed on the terrace, everything I'd discovered in my late-night internet search, everything about Marcus Johnson and his other family, and the elaborate fiction that had been constructed around my origins. With each revelation, I could hear Jake's breathing become more labored, more shocked. Maya, that's impossible. Mom wouldn't, we wouldn't. He trailed off, and I could practically hear him thinking, remembering, reassessing 16 years of family dynamics through this new lens. Think about it, Jake, I said gently. Really think about it. Have you ever seen my parents' marriage certificate? Have you ever met anyone who knew them as a couple? Have you ever wondered why I don't look like anyone in your family? Why I was never formally adopted? Why your mother has always treated me like a temporary inconvenience? Except for you girls, Jennifer added, smiling through her tears. He loved you girls more than anything. Amanda, show her the letters. Amanda disappeared for a moment and returned with a shoebox filled with papers. Dad wrote you letters, she explained. He never sent them because he didn't know how to reach you, but he wrote them. For your birthday every year, for Christmas, for when he heard about your achievements. They're all here. She handed me the box, and with trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, written in a sprawling artistic handwriting that somehow looked familiar. The first one was dated December 15, 2001, my 9th birthday. Dear Maya, it began, today you turned 9, and I wonder if you still like chocolate cake as much as you did when you were little. I wonder if you lost any teeth this year, if you learned to ride a bike, if you still laugh at knock-knock jokes. I couldn't read anymore, not yet. The reality of it, this man who'd loved me from a distance, who'd thought about me every year, who'd been prevented from knowing me by the same people who'd made me feel like an unwanted burden, was too overwhelming. Can I take these with me? I asked. Of course, Jennifer said. They're yours. They always were. We talked for another hour. Jennifer told me about Marcus's childhood, about his dreams of making it as a musician, about how he'd eventually given up performing to work construction so he could provide better for his family. Amanda showed me photos of him, and in his face, I finally saw the resemblance I'd never found in the Morrison family portraits. When I finally left their house, I had the shoebox of letters, copies of photos, and something I'd never expected, to find a sister who wanted to know me. Maya, Amanda called as I was getting into my car. Would you maybe want to have coffee sometime? I mean, if you're not too busy with school and stuff. I looked at this young woman who shared my father's eyes and my own stubborn chin, and for the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that a lot. The drive back to my new apartment, a tiny studio that I could afford on my own, without any help from the Morrison Family Trust Fund, gave me time to think about everything that had changed. In the past few months, I'd officially changed my name back to Maya Johnson. I'd applied for additional financial aid and taken on extra work-study hours to cover the gap left by losing Morrison family support. I'd started seeing a therapist through the University Counseling Center to help me process the complex grief of losing a family I'd never really had while simultaneously discovering a family I'd never known existed. Most importantly, I'd stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. Jake and I still talked occasionally. He had tried to mediate between his parents and me, but eventually he'd come to understand that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Sarah had made her position clear. As far as she was concerned, I was no longer her responsibility, and she preferred it that way. Uncle Robert had been more conflicted, but ultimately, he'd chosen to support his wife's decision rather than challenge it. It hurt, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wasn't constantly measuring my words and actions against the possibility of disappointing someone whose approval had always been conditional anyway. That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table with Marcus's letters spread around me. I read them chronologically, year by year, watching as his handwriting matured and his concerns shifted from wondering about my childhood to hoping I was finding my way as a young adult. Last letter was dated just a month before his death, written for my 18th birthday. Dear Maya, it read, "You're an adult now, and I hope that means you're starting to understand who you are and what you want from life. I hope you know that you're loved, even by people you've never met. I hope you know that you have choices that you don't have to accept anyone else's definition of who you're supposed to be. I hope that someday we'll have the chance to know each other. But if we don't, I want you to know that thinking about you has made me a better father to Amanda and a better person overall. You've been a gift in my life, even from a distance. Love always, Dad." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then I pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter of my own. "Dear Dad," I wrote, "I finally know the truth about everything, and I want you to know that I understand. I understand why you couldn't fight harder, why you had to love me from a distance, why you trusted other people to know what was best for me. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful that you thought about me, that you wrote to me, that you found ways to love me even when you couldn't be part of my life. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to find my own way forward, and I'm going to try to be the kind of person who would have made you proud. Love always, Maya." I folded the letter and put it in the box with all the others. Someday, I'd share it with Amanda. Someday, we'd talk about our father together and piece together the man we'd both loved in different ways. But for now, I had work to do. I had a degree to finish, a career to build, a life to create that was entirely my own. For the first time in my 24 years, I knew exactly who I was. Maya Johnson, daughter of Carol and Marcus, sister to Amanda, student of social work, and the author of my own story. The Morrison family name had never really been mine, but that was okay. I had my own name now, my own identity, my own understanding of where I came from and where I was going, and for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough.